Welcome back, Kid Detectives. I know yesterday was a nice short little reading. Well, today is a little bit longer. We are going to be starting our reading with Chapter 11 for Missing Manatee. Just a reminder before we get started, please have your detective notebook or a piece of paper out. That way you can jot down some ideas, maybe some questions that you might have, okay? Some things that need to be solved. We're going to be doing this for the rest of the year. It's nice and handy to maybe even mark it off as your Missing Manatee section. Okay, so grab that notebook so you're ready to write down some clues. Before we get started, I just want to remind you of the elements of mystery. We won't be focusing on a bunch of these really. Mostly, I want us to go back to our detective. Our friend Skeet is going to be back on the track of the missing manatee, and he's getting kind of frustrated and puzzled on where to find this missing manatee. At the end of this reading, I'm going to ask you, how can we get him back on track? What should he be looking for, and how can he get out of his little rut that he's in? So pay close attention and think about or brainstorm some ideas on how he may get back on track. So before we start reading chapter 11, let's go over our learning target a little bit. Our learning target is I can ask and answer questions to demonstrate understanding of a text, referring explicitly to the text as the basis for the answer, okay? And what that all means is that basically we're going to be answering questions to kind of show, hey, I understand what's going on. Mostly one of the questions I'm going to ask you at the end is to ask you how Skeet can get back on track. So he gets very frustrated this chapter because he's really wanting to find that missing manatee and he can't. We also kind of have him hanging out with his Meemaw, his grandma, and you know, she's kind of the character that gets him back on track. But I want you to also analyze how their characters are together. So it's almost like a character analysis. And we're going to be analyzing Skeet as well as his grandma, Meemaw, okay? So just pay attention to how you can answer questions to demonstrate that you get what's going on. Okay, enjoy. So as you can see, it's vocabulary time. So let's get started with that first word. The first word we're going to be looking at is conniption. Conniption is a fit of rage or hysterics. So kind of like our friend here, the Hulk, okay? He gets upset. You wouldn't like him when he's angry. He has those little fits of rage. Relating to our story, though, Skeet is worried that his mother is going to have a conniption. He's worried that she's going to find out that he was on a boat with no life jacket, no radio, no food, no sunscreen, and he's just worried that she's going to have a conniption and never let him go out fishing again, okay? Tying into that is the word doused, okay? And they don't seem like they go together, but Meemaw is going to be pouring aloe on Skeet's sunburn because he is red hot from the sun, and she's dousing him. So she's pouring liquid over and drenching him, kind of like when you pour chocolate over ice cream. Well, anyway, the next one is squeamish, okay? So squeamish is easily made to feel sick or faint or disgusted. And I know I'm showing ice cream right there, so I guess that's not a good one for squeamish, but that's a better face, okay? So squeamish is where something is awkward or gross and you're like, that's gross, I wouldn't want to eat it. So for instance, if Miss Garvin saw octopus, like live or cooked octopus, I'd be like, oh, I'm not eating that. Okay, so if you're feeling squeamish, maybe it's gonna make you sick or you don't feel so good, so it's not something you'd like to eat. Next word is peculiar. Okay, so peculiar means strange. Not that type of strange, though. Strange or odd, unusual, different, or unusual from the norm, okay? So it doesn't have to be Doctor Strange, okay? And I know I squeezed that in there, 2 Marvel characters today, yes. But what we're talking about is peculiar, is something that's unusual from the norm. So think about the idea of somebody that does something different. It doesn't have to be something odd or weird or strange. It's just that they went a different path. Okay, so if you look at the birds on the wire, you have one bird by himself and the rest are with each other. So he seems a little unusual or different. Okay, it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it's something odd. Okay. And our next vocabulary word is going to be fruitless. I don't have a picture for this, but we're going to analyze it anyway. Fruitless is failing to achieve the desired results or being unproductive or useless. Okay, so you're trying to go after something, you're looking, you're searching, you try and you try, you give a lot of work, and it was useless. Nothing comes of it. Now, sometimes I feel like this word doesn't make sense because even though you tried, you learn something from when you try usually. Like maybe you should try a different way, a different strategy. So fruitless kind of doesn't seem like it works always, but it's just to define that it didn't work. Okay, it was unproductive. Next word is ninny. Okay, and ninny is kind of a silly word. It means a foolish person. So if you're like, that person's a ninny. They're kind of silly, they're goofy, they're ridiculous. So you're just like, oh my gosh, this ninny. I guess it could be considered insult, but since it's just kind of a silly word, Grandma Meemaw says, Skeet, you don't think your grandma's a ninny, so she's just making fun of herself, but she's kind of like, yeah, I am kind of ridiculous, So it's kind of a cool definition or word to know. And then our last definition or word that we're going to go over, which you should probably already know, but just in case you understand, is buoy. So a buoy is an anchored float serving as a navigation marker to show reefs or other hazards, or for mooring, okay, where people kind of lock in. I guess Skeet's going to be going out on his boat, and he's going to see a bunch of buoys and trash and stuff in the riverbanks and stuff like that. So I wanted to kind of show you a buoy, but I guarantee you the buoys he's seeing are really old and junky and kind of like pieces. So this is just an example of a nice one. I'm sure that the one that Skeet sees isn't a very nice one. Okay, so these were our vocabulary words for today. Not too hard, hopefully entertaining. Enjoy this book. This chapter. I apologize, it's a little bit longer today, but we will get through it. Yesterday was nice and easy with 5.5 pages. Today is a little bit longer. So enjoy, guys. All right, so before we start chapter 11, let's review with a little bit of recap of chapter 9 and 10. Okay, so chapter 9, Skeet had finally caught his tarpon. Okay, the big, huge tarpon that he's been looking for. It's his first grand experience. And in chapter 10, Dirty Dan and Skeet were heading back to the marina. On the way, Skeet was so excited he wanted to call his dad Mac, but then he found out that Dirty Dan didn't have a working radio. Okay? And then finally, they did make it to the marina and they ran into Blink. Here's where we kind of want to remember this part is Blink was acting kind of strange. Because when he saw them, he wasn't like, hey, do you want to play my flip game? He was like, is Dirty Dan mad? Like, is he angry, So in the book, and I have the book right here, there's a strange thing where, like, Dirty Dan gives an odd expression, okay? And he's just like, why is he saying that? And then Skeet ends up saying, he's talking about him catching the tarpon. He goes, I sure did. I said, he was a beauty, and believe me, nobody's mad, except maybe the fish, okay? And then it gets kind of laughed off, like, Blink keeps on repeating, nobody was mad but the fish, hot, and he keeps on repeating over and over that phrase. So it kind of gets hidden that maybe there's something fishy going on. Ding, ding. And then the last part, Skeet finally gets to be like a classic fisherman, okay? He gets to go to the marina and tell his story and enjoy his soda and chips and a lot of soda, which I was surprised in. But he gets to enjoy his soda and tell his fisherman story. And I like the last sentence. It says, I finally had a good fish story of my own, and I figured on taking my sweet time telling it. Okay, so he's really glowing, basking in the glory. He's just really happy that he's finally an actual fisherman, not just somebody looking for bait. Okay, so we're moving on. We're getting back into looking for the missing manatee. Okay, so to chapter 11, Skeet is back on the hunt. Okay, he's really thinking about, I want to find this and figure out who did this because it bothers him. So pay attention. It is a long chapter, I know, much longer than yesterday's. But really pay attention to how would you help Skeet, because that's one of the questions at the end. What kind of clues or what kind of advice can you give him? Think about a character analysis as far as how Skeet feels about his parents, not getting along. That's Skeet's character. And then we're also going to talk about Meemaw and how she's kind of kooky and crazy, but is she a good influence? Is she good to have around for Skeet? So think about those questions. Those will be the questions at the end, just 3. Enjoy our reading today, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Chapter 11. When I got home, Mom wasn't back from work yet. Meemaw looked up from the newspaper she was reading, and her blue eyes got real big. "Why, Skeeter," she said, "your face is redder than my good boots." I glanced in the mirror and groaned. I'd forgotten sunscreen, along with everything else. The constant blaring sun was another aspect of Florida living that freaked Mom out. She worried all the time about sunburn and sun cancer. It was a real concern for fishing guides who were out on the water all the time, and another problem Mom had with Mac's way of life. "Come on in the bathroom with me right now," said Meemaw. "Let's get something on that before your mother gets home and has a conniption." Meemaw doused me in aloe gel, talking the whole time about an ad she'd seen in the paper for a Chinese restaurant called the Golden Moon, which had just opened in town. I'd never been to a Chinese restaurant, old as I am. Can you believe it? First chance we get, I want to take you and your mama there. We'll try everything on the menu, even if it sounds peculiar. I hear they do cook some peculiar dishes. But we won't be squeamish, will we, Skeeter? I've never been squeamish a day in my life, and I don't intend to start now. I can't abide people who won't try new things. Can you? Where's the fun in that? Meemaw loved trying new things, and she loved going out to eat. She always said that any meal she didn't have to cook was a good one. As soon as I was able to get a word in, I told her about my tarpon, and she got just as excited about that as she'd been about eating Chinese food. Then Mom came home, and I told the whole story again, but not until after she had her conniption about my sunburn. Meemaw's aloe had made the burn feel cooler, but it hadn't done anything to hide the redness. Mom put more aloe on me, fussing the whole time. "Didn't your father give you sunscreen?" Luckily, I didn't have time to answer before she went on. "And that Dan! You'd think a grown man would act more responsible, especially when he's in charge of someone else's child." "Mom, you make it sound like I'm a little kid," I protested. "It's not Mac's fault I forgot to use sunscreen, or Dan's either. Besides," I lied, "this sunburn looks a lot worse than it feels." Seeing how upset she was, I hoped more than ever that she'd never know all the parts of the story I'd left out. By the time we'd eaten dinner and I'd called Mac and told the fish story again, I was beat. It wasn't until I was in bed and about to drift off that I realized I hadn't thought about the manatee all day. I got up and dialed Mac's number again. "Hey, Mac, I forgot to ask you. Did you talk to Earl today? Did they find out anything about who killed that manatee?" "I did talk to him, and they haven't learned a thing," Mac answered. "Earl feels bad because he says they're not really trying. It's like he told you the first day. They're busy and there's nothing to go on." The news, or lack of it, was about what I'd expected, but it was still disappointing. "Okay," I said. "I was just wondering." "Hey, did you get a picture of that tarpon?" Mac asked. "No camera," I explained. "But that's okay," Mac interrupted to say, "'cause you've got a picture in your brain, don't you?" "Yeah," I said, "and that isn't ever going to fade." I nodded. Then, remembering we were on the phone, I said, "I can still see it clear as anything." "I know, buddy," said Mac. "I know." The cool thing was, he really did know. Listen, Skeet, I'm leaving tomorrow to trail the boat down to the Keys to meet a client. I'm going to fish him for 4 or 5 days, depending on how things go. Oh, I said. Okay, is it that guy from Chicago who talks on his cell phone the whole time you're out on the boat? Mac chuckled. The very same. He's sure got a funny idea about getting away from it all. But what the heck, he's okay, and he's a big tipper if I can find us some fish. You will, I said. Listen, buddy, you have a good time on the rest of your vacation, and I hope you hear something about that manatee soon. Yeah, me too. Well, have fun, Mac. I'll try, and I'll call you when I get back in town. Bye. In bed, as I drifted off, I had a funny thought about parents and kids. Mom tried, but she didn't get why tarpon fishing was so incredibly cool. And Mac tried, but he wasn't the type to make sure I ate lunch, wore sunscreen, went to bed on time, and stuff like that. Maybe that was why parents came in pairs, at least at the beginning, so no one could cover the stuff the other didn't. Now that Mom and Mac weren't together, maybe I was going to have to take care of more things for myself. I kind of wanted to think about that a little, but I must have fallen asleep 2 seconds later in spite of my sunburn. When I woke up the next morning, the dead manatee was on my mind again, along with my tarpon. I stretched and groaned at the pain in both arms. It was a good kind of pain, though, a badge of honor. I lay in bed, flexing my arms and thinking. Earl had hypothesized that the manatee's killer towed the dead body behind a boat and cut it loose someplace way out in the Gulf of Mexico. It was possible, I reasoned, that the manatee hadn't been taken so far out, and depending on the wind direction, it might have washed up on shore far from where I'd found it the first time, but not too far. It was possible, also, that the killer had towed it into the tangled maze of the backcountry. Either way, there was a chance that if I went out in my skiff looking, I'd find it, and if I did, we'd have some evidence of a crime, and with that, maybe somebody would actually work on finding the killer. A little voice kept telling me it wasn't likely that I'd find the body, but I'd felt the same way about the odds of my catching a tarpon, and look what happened. Anyway, I thought, I was on vacation and had the time. I told myself I could work on my English paper, but then I remembered I only had to write a first draft. No big deal. I didn't need much convincing to go cruising around in my boat. I grinned, thinking, and this time I'll take plenty of food, sodas, and fresh water, and put on a ton of sunscreen. I needed another $8 before I could get a radio antenna, but it was a clear, calm, sunny day, and I wasn't worried about the weather. As it turned out, Mom said I could go, but she insisted on putting sunscreen on me herself this time. I tried not to flinch as she touched my reddened skin. She also gave me an extremely stupid-looking hat with a big brim and ear flaps, and made me promise to wear it. I didn't argue, though, because at least she was letting me go. Greasy with sunscreen from head to toe, smelling like a giant coconut, and looking just as ridiculous, I finally got out of the house. I took off the hat as soon as I was out of sight. Then, steering the skiff downriver, I knew I had to make a decision. Was I going to look for the manatee's body floating out in the Gulf or washed up on shore? The idea of trying to find something in miles of open ocean was discouraging, so I decided to search the channels that crisscrossed among the sawgrass and mangrove keys closer to shore. The tide was almost high, so the water was deep enough for my skiff, and I'd have several hours before it dropped too low to run the boat in the backcountry. I began at the scene of the crime, which was how I'd been thinking of the place where I'd found that manatee. Then I took the first channel that branched off the main river. I kept my speed slow so I could scan the edges of the mangroves for anything out of the ordinary being mangrove roots and the small fish and crabs that sheltered beneath them, and the occasional buoy or piece of trash left behind by humans. I worked systematically, following the meandering path of each channel to its end, then turning back to the river and going to the next channel and starting over. It was fun, actually, and I was having a good time exploring all the secret, hidden places most people never saw. I spotted snook and redfish and little snappers in the shallow water, and lots of birds, and found a few new fishing spots I'd never have discovered otherwise. Once I spotted a large dark mass in the mangrove roots and got excited, but it turned out to be a garbage bag. The tide became too low for my boat to navigate the backcountry waters, so I headed for home. I felt frustrated and began to think maybe the police were right not to be spending their time on this. When I reached the house, Meemaw was waiting for me. "Skeeter, your mama has to work late tonight, and she said for us to go ahead and eat without her. I'm thinking we ought to go to that new Chinese restaurant for supper. We can bring some back for her. What do you say?" "Sure," I answered. "Just let me take a quick shower first." On the way to the restaurant, Meemaw talked a mile a minute. "Now, Skeet, don't be surprised if we're supposed to take off our shoes and sit on the floor to eat. I heard that in China people do that. Or maybe that's in Japan. I wore pants and these sandals slip right off, so I'm ready for anything." I know I said I'd sample whatever's on the menu, but I've been thinking about it, and I don't believe I can eat a thing that's still alive. I don't relish the idea of my food fighting back when I stick my fork in it. Do you? Although I suppose we'll be using chopsticks, I hadn't thought of that. Well, I'll try anything else. Eel, octopus, that soup they make with bird nests, even though I heard it has bird saliva in it. Can you imagine? As long as it's not squirming. She paused for a second and asked, "Do you think your grandma's a terrible ninny, Skeeter?" I told Meemaw that I liked my food to be dead, too. "Definitely not alive or even wounded," I said. I didn't think that meant we were ninnies. At the Golden Moon, no one asked for our shoes, and we were seated at a regular table instead of on the floor, and I thought Meemaw looked a tiny bit disappointed, but she perked right up when we were handed our menus. Meemaw read the first line aloud. "Welcome to the Golden Moon. You are the customer. The customer is booze." She looked at me, a puzzled expression on her face. We both started laughing at the same moment, realizing that someone had typed booze instead of boss. Meemaw composed herself and said, "Personally, I've always been partial to a restaurant where the customer is booze." That set me giggling again, but Meemaw had moved on down the menu. "Can you believe these prices, Skeeter, they're so reasonable," she exclaimed. "We can afford to get anything you like. Oh, look here. It says you can order a combination plate. You can try lots of different foods just like we wanted to." I scanned the menu to see what she meant. It was pretty cool. There were 4 columns marked A, B, C, and D. If you ordered a combination platter, you could choose one dish from each column. "Let's do that, Skeeter," Meemaw said excitedly. "Yeah," I said. "That way we'll be able to try 8 different things if we share." I'm just going to close my eyes and point and see what I get. "I think I'm going to be more scientific," I said. "I'm going to make sure no 2 things I order have any of the same words in them. That way I'll be sure to get a good variety, right?" "That's just brilliant, Skeeter," Meemaw said, beaming. When we both decided what we wanted, I looked over the remaining pages of the menu. Pointing to a dish called Happy Family, I said, "That was us until Mom threw Mac out." Meemaw sighed. "I don't know what your mama's doing. I'm not sure she does. Right now she thinks being apart from your daddy is going to make her happy. But I'm afraid your mama has never had much of a talent for happiness. It's something I don't understand." I thought about that. It was true that Mom always seemed to be thinking about what was wrong or how things could be better. It was as if she couldn't see what was good about our lives. She seemed to think everything wasn't perfect was Mac's fault. What's going to happen? I was afraid to hear the answer, even as I asked the question. "We'll have to wait and see, Skeeter. I know it's hard." We were quiet for a while, then Meemaw pointed to something on the menu called 10,000 Delights. tell you what, she said, smiling at me with a hint of mischief in her eyes. Let's order your mama this. That was one thing I really loved about Meemaw. It was impossible for her to stay gloomy for long. I smiled back and said, maybe it'll cheer her up. It's worth a try. The waitress came then to take our orders, and I checked her out. She looked Chinese, but she was wearing an ordinary white shirt and black pants, and I realized I'd expected some sort of costume, like the ones I'd seen in National Geographic magazine. After Meemaw placed her order, she asked, nothing in there will be squirming, will it? The waitress looked puzzled. Squirming? I could see that she not only found the word difficult to pronounce, but had no idea what it meant. Meemaw said, you know, squirming. She did a little shimmy with her shoulders and wiggled her fingers in the air. Alive! The waitress looked distressed. Still moving, Meemaw explained. To demonstrate further, she stood up, wiggled her hips, and snapped her fingers, making her eyes wide and lively and smiling like crazy. I have to say she looked alive all right. The waitress, with an expression of alarm on her face, looked at me for help, but I was laughing too hard to say anything. She turned and fled into a back room. Where'd she go? And what is so funny? Meemaw said with surprise. Finally, a man came from the back and asked if he could help us. His English was a lot better than the waitress's, and Meemaw's fears of wiggling food were put to rest. When our plates came, we tried gamely to eat with the chopsticks we were given, but we were both pretty hopeless. The waitress saw us struggling and brought us forks, so we were able to chow down. I didn't know what I was eating half the time, but it was all good, and as Meemaw pointed out, definitely dead. That paper you've got to write, Skeeter, what's it about? She asked. A pet peeve. I made a face. Mr. G's idea of a fun assignment. Well, it could be worse, Meemaw said. You've actually got something you're really peeved about. What? I asked. Then before she answered, I got it. Oh, you mean the manatee? Yeah, hey, that's not a bad idea. Meemaw looked pleased with herself. Then she asked me what I'd done all day, so I told her about my fruitless search for the manatee's body. She eyed me shrewdly. You gonna give up? She asked. Well, it sort of seems like a waste of time, I said. You have some other big important plans besides your schoolwork, I mean? No. Well, Meemaw said, it's only Thursday. You've still got a 3-day weekend ahead. That was true, and even though I hadn't found the manatee and didn't really expect to, it had felt good to try, especially since nobody else was doing anything. Meemaw went on, shaking her head. I can't stop wondering who would do such a full-brained thing. I couldn't stop wondering either. Might as well do something as sit around and wonder. I expect I'll go back out tomorrow, I said. That's the way, Skeeter, said Meemaw. Stick to it. It's like my singing. She poked her hair modestly. I have a certain amount of talent. Lord knows he gave it to me himself. But it was hard work and practice that won me that karaoke contest. Nobody ever got anywhere by giving up. Now bring home your mama's supper, will you? I picked up the carton filled with 10,000 delights, and Meemaw picked up the check. Then she reached for the menu and slipped it into her pocketbook. I'm going to hang this on the refrigerator so I can think about what I'm going to order next time, she said. There are still oodles of things we haven't tried yet. There were oodles of places I hadn't looked for the manatee too, and I guessed I was going to try them all.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 11. Let's go over some of those questions we're going to ask you, and you can answer in our team's assignment. So, the first question is, Skeet is really feeling down about his dad, Mac, not being around. What do you think he can do to make things better? Okay, so this is a real character analysis. You're figuring out what he can do, and there may be no real good solution, but what kind of advice would you give a kid if he's struggling and his parents are having a hard time getting along together? So just something simple. I want you guys to think about what type of character he is and what kind of things that he could do to make things better. Question number 2. Meemaw is a pretty wacky character. Do you think she is a good influence on Skeet? So think about how she acts and how kind of kooky she can be. She sometimes says random things. Is she a good influence, or is she helpful towards Skeet at all? Give me just a sentence that tells me if Meemaw is a good influence. And number 3, this is an important one, okay? So Skeet was feeling a bit frustrated in his search for the manatee. If you were his sidekick, okay, his side detective, what advice would you give him and how would you help him? So I prefer you to answer this with 2 sentences, but if you're only able to do one, that's okay. Tell me how you would help him, like what would you do next to help him solve this crime, and what advice could you give him since he's so frustrated? And I know Meemaw kind of helped him with that advice. She kind of did our work for us, but let's pretend that we're his friend and we are trying to help him out there. Okay, so go ahead and answer those questions in the forums, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.